So, pleased to finally meet you, by the way. I've been reading your blog from America for quite some time.
Right.
So, could you tell me a little bit about what hard news is?
Hard News began as a weekly radio commentary on a college radio station here called 95 BFM. Ran for 11 years as that every Friday morning, and I was tapped out by that point. And blogs had come to my attention, and I thought that's where I want to go with this. So Hard News became the centrepiece of a group blog site called publicaddress.net, which is a fair part of my work these days.
How many people read it?
There's disagreements over exactly how many unique readers we've got, somewhere between 20 and 40,000 a month. We get about 7,000 visits a day.
So, what do you feel the role? You've been both a traditional journalist and a blog journalist. What's the role of the media in New Zealand?
Much the same as it is in any other Western democracy, I think, to hold power to account. Maybe that's not done as aggressively as it could be in all cases, but there is a good deal of freedom for the media to go about their business.
And how is the blogosphere any different, or is it mainly the same purpose?
The blogosphere is probably not representative of the general political culture. There are a lot more extreme right-wingers in the local blogosphere than there are out there in the real New Zealand.
Why do you believe that there's more extreme right-wingers and not just extremists on both sides?
To some extent it's extremists on both sides, but the right has the noisiest and most numerous, most populist bloggers. And,
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. There's a particular appeal, particularly the anonymity. I think. You notice that a lot of the right-wing bloggers are blogging anonymously, which is less the case on the other side of the spectrum.
So, how would you say that conservatism in New Zealand differs from American conservatism in your experience?
Mostly on the moral and social side. For example, abortion simply isn't an issue in New Zealand. We had that battle in the 1970s. There are some people who still aren't happy with the laws as they are, but it's not something that any political party would, apart perhaps from a fringe Christian party, but it's not something that any party would venture into. It's just seen as being no percentage there.
And how much influence would you say that third parties and fringe parties have in the MMP system?
Third parties are having quite a big influence with every government so far, because we end up needing a kingmaker, and where those third parties go is absolutely crucial. I think the first time around, the first MMP election, Winston Peters' New Zealand First Party did some damage to perceptions of MMP, because he was perceived by many people as doing the opposite of what he had promised to do. His message had been, vote for us if you want to get rid of National, and then he went into coalition with National. That was an unstable government. I think one thing that Helen Clark has been able to do is, even where they've had defections and a small majority in the current term, she's been able to run stable governments under MMP, and I think she deserves a lot of credit for
that. Would you say that the influence that third parties have are disproportionate, or or exactly right, or too small, or what?
The current government, I don't think the influence of third parties could be called disproportionate. I think there's been a degree of realism in the demands, especially Winston Peters and New Zealand First have been able to have a second try at it. I think the next election in 2008 is going to be interesting, because poll after poll after poll suggests that the Maori Party is going to be the kingmaker, and for obvious reasons of political strategy they have to keep their options open, and they may well support the National Party, which could be problematic, I think, for their supporters, because it was quite clear at this election that most of the people who voted for the Maori Party candidate in the Maori electorates then went and gave their party vote to Labour, which is a fairly strong steer about what they'd like to see happen.
And would you say that the two major parties changed from more of a broad spectrum type big tent party to narrower, more focused parties when MMP came around?
I think they're still broad churches. They probably differentiated from each other more, although maybe that would have happened anyway. I think they pride themselves in being broad churches, those parties. So I don't think they became more targeted. Where we saw the niche appeal was in the new parties, ACT, the Green Party, which had been around for a while. They had, I think of all the third parties that have been working in this environment, I think the Greens are the ones that get it and who have been able to establish a credible role even amongst people who don't vote for them. They are seen as honest brokers and to some extent as the conscience of a Labour government, even though they're not formally in coalition. On the other side of the spectrum, ACT could have been a genuine classical liberal party, and there would have been a niche there. They could have been the corresponding Nationals conscience. But they got too populist, they lost focus, and I think there's a real missed opportunity in that party.
You mentioned that the Greens really get MMP and they really know how to work within that system. Do you think a lot of that had to do with Rod Donald being part of the ERC and then joining the Green Party?
Yeah, no, I think Rod Donald's grounding in MMP certainly didn't hurt them. I just think it's the way they've gone about. I certainly don't agree with every policy platform they have, but the way they've gone about their role in Parliament, which actually hasn't been as part of a formal coalition, but they, when you look at something like the Electoral Finance Bill, which has been extraordinarily controversial and it has been quite difficult for Labour, the Greens have come in and played a very useful role there. And I think they've shown that you can play a useful role in an MMP Parliament without actually being part of a formal coalition.
Do you believe there's more political participation and knowledge of what goes on in Wellington now under MMP than there was under First Past the Post?
It would be hard to know. It'd be interesting to see some figures on political participation. The days of the two big parties having mass memberships are passing. They certainly don't have memberships the size they used to. The interesting thing, I think, is the way the Maori Party developed. That was genuine grassroots politics. You could go to church fairs or Saturday markets and there would be a stall set up with someone from the Maori Party and you could put your name down and have a chat, and it was almost an old-fashioned sort of politics. They didn't spend much on their campaign at all.
Would you believe that has there been any sort of increase or decrease in negative campaigning since MMP was established?
The idea that MMP was going to do away with all forms of political nastiness, including negative campaigning, I don't think was ever realistic, and certainly we saw some very negative campaigning in the year of the last election, the 2005 election. Interestingly, not so much in the actual campaign period. I think some of the most negative stuff was Nationals billboards outside the formal campaign window, which were the iwi versus Kiwi one. I was horrified by that, and that was a deliberately divisive message. It was entirely negative. On the other hand, New Zealanders do have limited patience for particularly negative campaigning. I think we're going to see a lot more of it in the next election because Labour will have been there for 3 terms and is as vulnerable as any third-term government. And yeah, I mean you've seen it right through this parliamentary term. So yes, I think there will be negative campaigning.
I just pass you a note.
Okay. Oh, could you explain what an iwi is for an American audience?
An iwi. An iwi is a tribe, usually associated with a regional area, although there may have been a diaspora and they may be spread quite widely. Iwi are the power base of modern Maori. They're often regionally or rurally based. There's a school of thought that iwi became as important as they are because they were easier for the Crown to deal with, whereas the real authority had actually been at the lower level, at a hapu or family level. But yeah, iwi are important.
And could you explain why the background behind the Kiwi versus iwi billboard?
Yeah, I'll try and. The iwi versus Kiwi billboard had its background in the foreshore and seabed controversy, where it was established by one court that Maori had the right to go to court and claim rights in the foreshore and seabed. That's the bit, between the high and low tide mark that may not have been extinguished when they signed the Treaty of Waitangi with the Crown. There was all manner of panic there, and it became an enormous wedge issue. Maori still feel very bad about the measures that Labour took. They were denied, as far as they could see, their opportunity to take a claim in court. National insisted that Labour had given away far too much. I think one interesting point with the whole foreshore and seabed thing was that it underlined the fact that the coastlines are actually precious to all New Zealanders, and I think that's why there was so much controversy around it.
So would you say that MMP has made politicians more accountable to the public?
Yeah, I think MMP has made politicians more accountable because you're not seeing anyone. You're not seeing any governments able to govern on their own with 20-seat majorities and basically do what they want. And two or three governments in a row doing that was actually a major driver amongst public sentiment for the introduction of MMP. There was this feeling that the two big parties had to be reined in somehow because they were campaigning on one thing, going into power and then doing the opposite. That was certainly the public perception, and governments have to work a lot harder under MMP to get their majority and to get bills passed. So yeah, they are more accountable, and it's a good thing.
Were you talking about Rogernomics just then, when they were promising one thing and the other?
Yeah. Because I think in the 1984 government, the Longi government that came in after the snap election, the public was ready for some pain. It was widely recognised that the economy was in a parlous state and had gone completely out of shape. It was one of the most protected economies in the world. I don't think the public was ready for the way things were done and the absolute abandon with which some things were done. And also things that the Labour Party had said it wouldn't do. So there's a feeling amongst the public that there was that there had to be a way of holding back these governments.
And when people vote in MMP, are they voting more for the people in the party, or more for the policies of the party? In other words, are they voting for the personality or the idea?
I think our politics has become more presidential. So they're voting for the policies, but they're also voting for the leader. Probably to a much lesser extent than used to be the case. Are they voting for the local constituency MP? I mean, there are safe seats where local MPs are elected time and time again, but you get the feeling that the emphasis has gone away from that.
And this may be a long question, but what's the most What's the largest change you've noticed in campaigning and electioneering under MMP?
Um, yeah, okay, I'll think about this. I think the biggest change in election campaigns under MMP is that, particularly the two big parties, but also the minor parties, not only have to outline a policy platform, they have to say who they could work with and under what terms, and the public expects to know that. And with Winston Peters' apparent about face after the 1996 election, I think that became evident that people were really angry about that.
Dr. Donald Brash,
Yeah.
who was leader of the National Party during the 2005 election, when he first came into the National Party, he came in as a list MP, even though it wasn't going to be likely for him to get a constituency. So, what do you think of these VIP or celebrity MPs who are placed on a spot on a list, high up on the list, where they're going to be pretty much guaranteed a membership in Parliament?
In principle, I don't have a problem with finding someone you regard as having particularly useful talents and giving them a list placing that means they will be there. They will be in Parliament. That's fine. I think with someone like Don Brash, the problem that you saw was he just didn't quite have the political experience. He didn't have the political smarts because he had been, as someone in the National Party put it, helicoptered in. And I think that there's a certain concern that that will also be the case with the new leader, John Key. Whereas on the Labour side, you're talking about people who joined the youth branch of the party and have been working their way up over a very long period. And I think there's benefits to that.
How would you say that MMP has affected the lives of New Zealanders who don't typically follow politics or current events?
I think as a result of MMP, even people who may not necessarily follow politics very closely are hearing more voices, and they're hearing more and more diverse opinions. For better or worse, everyone will know who Sue Bradford, the Green Party MP, is, and I think that's actually quite useful.
And what do you see as the greatest benefit to arise from the MMP change?
The greatest. I think the greatest benefit to emerge from MMP has simply been the diversity, the fact that there are actually now platforms available for new and different ideas, whereas it all had to be accommodated within these two monolithic parties that were starting to look a bit like each other and weren't really set up for any kind of innovation or novelty, whereas we've actually seen parties come from nowhere, most notably the Maori Party, but also ACT, and I think it's allowed for the possibility of political innovation and refreshing. So.
And what would you say was the greatest drawback?
I think probably the greatest drawback is the tendency for third parties to be in the position of kingmaker after every election, and you're relying on them to exercise that power responsibly, and not make demands out of keeping with their real level of support. It hasn't been a huge problem, but you can see it being a difficulty going forward.
How are we on time on the tape?
20 minutes yet.
Oh, we're good. So, what modifications have been suggested to the MMP system to further improve it?
Some people don't think that the 5% threshold for entry to Parliament is fair and democratic. They believe it should be a lot lower, because basically you can actually attract. The whole idea of MMP was to prevent wasted votes, and we've seen it particularly with one particular Christian-based party just failed to make the 5% threshold, and that was actually an awful lot of wasted votes, and people who did not have representation as a result of their vote.
And why was the 5% cap instituted?
I think for the sake of stability, so that you didn't have this balkanised parliament with all these different interests running around. MMP does put emphasis on the parties themselves, and the parties are expected to be of a reasonable scale and competence. If your threshold was 1%, you'd end up with a rather different looking parliament, and it might be kind of a messy parliament.
Do you often see the often drawn out post-election negotiations as a necessary evil or something else?
I think we're getting a bit better at the post-election negotiations, and also the public is more accepting of them. Going back again to the 1996 election, where it took months and people felt that the wrong thing had happened, I think that did perceptions of MMP quite a bit of damage, whereas the current parliamentary term, even though the government has problems with majorities occasionally, it has been fairly stable, and it's been relatively transparent too.
And New Zealand's quite unique in the fact that it changed over its political system during a time of relative calm, no war. The economy wasn't great, but it wasn't tanking. What do you think were the key drivers of the change?
It's interesting. I think it was the public desire for change. At the time, of course, there was a really very well-funded and aggressive campaign against MMP, which was backed by the same group of wealthy individuals who were concerned that they would lose their influence. These are the people who had been friends of the reforming Labour government, were also friends of the national government that succeeded it, and had done quite well out of the economic reforms. And they perceived that perhaps that was going to change. It was going to be harder to get truly radical legislation through, which is true. And they funded something called the Campaign for Better Government, which was fronted by a telecom board member called Peter Shirtcliffe. The Campaign for Better Government was never honest about what it was doing, and it, as always happens, a strategy document got leaked, and it turned out they were basically trying to sow fear, and they were looking to sow fear amongst the least sophisticated voters. They knew that their message wasn't actually that strong, so they were looking for people who didn't really get it. My memory of that period is of being called up and recruited onto a focus group by the Campaign for Better Government, which was actually really good fun, because we sat down and they'd carefully organised it so there were it was roughly 50-50 pro and anti-MMP, and I think they wanted to see what the arguments were coming out of the focus group. And of course, by the time myself and a couple of other people had explained the system, I think we were by the end of the focus group, it was 2/3 in favour and 1/3 against, and the CBGB people were not very happy at all.
Anything particularly? It basically sounds like it was an interesting time. Were there like any moments of realization or any funny moments?
I thought one really significant moment was when The Listener, which is New Zealand's largest news weekly, and has a liberal social democratic tradition, going back decades, actually took the step of, they ran a cover the week of the election that just said vote MMP, and that was somewhat controversial. Some people thought that it wasn't the position of a publication like that to be to be going that far, but I actually thought it was a really significant and welcome development. It was a good cover, and it's one that people will remember.
Do you think the CBG kind of shot themselves in the foot with the television coverage, and basically everybody knew that this was, by, being funded by the telecom corporation, and basically the idea I'm trying to get at was the greatest argument for MMP at the end the people telling you to vote against it?
Let's just hold up for a second.
Yeah. If you knew a bit about the political background to it, the identities of the people telling you not to vote for MMP probably would have been quite a big motivation to vote for it. I'm not sure whether the general public was that au fait with all the details, and they certainly did get some traction. But yeah, in the end, people just didn't buy the CBG's presentation of itself. They were not a group of concerned citizens looking to raise the standard of government in New Zealand. They were a richly funded lobby group looking to torpedo a move to a new electoral system that they figured actually would not suit their interests.
Actually, this is something that Helen suggested. It said that New Zealanders often have that they don't have a strong sense of identity, and there's the idea of the tourists getting off the plane and saying, "So, what do you think of New Zealand?" I know that's something you've considered in the Great New Zealand Argument. Do you see this assertive change of election process as inconsistent with this kind of action? Because it really is quite remarkable to change an entire electoral system.
We've actually got right through the 20th century. We've got an extraordinary track record of groundbreaking social legislation, but people would come here to do research and see what we'd done and expect us to have theory behind it, and we almost invariably didn't. It's a very practical culture, and we really didn't actually have a lot of theory behind the things we did, and I kind of wonder whether this is a little bit the same. But there was a feeling of pride that not just that we'd changed our electoral system, but that we had done it in such an orderly and democratic way. It doesn't happen very often that a change that big is achieved in a wholly peaceful manner.
I think that's it for my questions. Is there anything else you wanted to add, or?
I think I covered most of it. No, that's it.
All right. Before we put the camera away, we'll switch over to the card. We'll take some production stills.
Sure thing.
All right.